So my name's Patrick Dirksen. I'm a mentor at Polygons with expertise in creative writing and literature and religious studies. And I'm excited to be moderating today. So for the presenters, just make sure you have your slides ready to share. And are you familiar with the share screen option? Yeah, great. So I'll send you a little private message when you have 2 minutes left. I think we have 15-minute slots for each presentation, and then there'll be time for Q&A with audience members, and then I'll usher in the next speaker. So I think, yeah, we have one attendee right now. They'll come in, I'm sure, but we should get started. And so let me just say a few words about the goal of the symposium, just to make this more formal. Okay, we've got a bit more attendees. So the goal of the symposium is to showcase all the hard work that you guys have been doing over the course of your tenure at Polygons over the last few months. So there's 3 of you presenting today on a variety of topics that you've been researching. During the presentations, another Polygons mentor will be scoring the presentations, which will help us determine prize winners after the event. During Q&A, please type your questions in the chat. And we're going to give, I think it's two minutes to do for the presenters to respond. So today we have Isabel Wang, Jasmine Huang, and I'm sorry that there's nuances with pronunciation that I'm sure I'm not getting, I apologize, and Mallory Cooper. So first up, I'd like to welcome Isabel. So Isabel, please share your screen with us.
Yeah.
And I will mute myself.
Okay, can we see my screen? Okay. So my name is Isabel Wang, and my project was on coping during COVID-19, how locus of control influences coping response in an uncontrollable situation. The COVID-19 pandemic is an anomalous and fundamentally uncontrollable event that has led a large portion of the global population to experience mental health issues. The restrictive and isolating nature of lockdowns and uncertainty surrounding preventative measures have contributed to poor mental health during the pandemic. Since certain coping strategies have been linked with worse mental health outcomes, understanding predictors of coping strategies can help to identify those in need of additional psychological support to mitigate their stress. Psychological responses to COVID-19 may be influenced by the degree to which people feel they are in control of their lives. This is referred to as locus of control. High internal locus of control is characterized by the belief that one's own decisions guide their life outcomes, while high external locus of control refers to the belief that outside influences guide life outcomes. Studying for a test is an example of an internal behavior because you believe your own efforts will influence your results. Meanwhile, manifestation is an example of an external behavior because you believe that fate or chance will guide your life. Coping is the cognitive and behavioral efforts used by an individual to mitigate stress. A validated measure for coping strategies is the brief COPE inventory, which subdivides coping strategies into 3 categories. Problem-focused coping aims to find a solution to the stressful situation. Emotion-focused coping works to manage emotional distress, and avoidant coping involves disengaging from a stressful situation and not dealing with it directly. My study aims to investigate how locus of control influences coping response among adolescents in the New York suburbs during COVID-19. Prior to the start of the study, we distributed participant and parental/guardian consent forms. Next, we administered the survey via SurveyMonkey to 215 students at a high school in the New York suburbs. Participants were first asked a series of demographic questions. Next, locus of control was measured using an adapted 23-item Waters locus of control scale. Here's a sample question. Participants were given binary answer choices with one response corresponding with internality and the other with externality. Participants selected the statement that they agreed with the most. Scores are calculated on the basis of a median split. Participants with scores ranging from 0 to 11 were considered internals, and those with scores ranging from 12 to 23 considered externals. Then an adapted version of the brief COPE inventory with 26 items was used to assess the different ways in which people deal with stress related to the pandemic. This is a sample question. Participants were instructed to respond to the scale based on what they did or felt in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Using a Likert scoring system, participants chose from responses ranging from 1, I haven't been doing this at all, to 4, I've been doing this a lot. Lastly, using SPSS, multiple linear regression analyses are used to evaluate the strength of correlations and the associated significance between scores on Waters locus F control and brief COPE subscales. Overall, the majority of the population classified as externals. This indicates that the majority of students surveyed felt an overall lack of control over events in their lives during the pandemic. This could be explained by the age of the participants, as Blanchard, Fields, et al. Found that adolescents have significantly higher external locus of control than adults ages 60 and over. When the data were stratified by gender, non-men scored significantly higher than men on Waters locus F control scale. This indicates that non-men were more external than men and had decreased feeling of control over their lives. Our results show that locus of control has a modest negative correlation with problem-focused coping behaviors. This means that internals who feel they are in more control were more inclined to engage in problem-focused coping. A similar trend was observed between locus of control and 2 subcategories of problem-focused coping, which are active coping and planning. This suggests an increase in internality corresponds with increased use of problem-focused coping strategies. Our findings of a modest positive correlation between internals and problem-focused coping are consistent with those of studies not conducted in the context of traumatic or uncontrollable events. We found a modest positive correlation between locus of control and emotion-focused coping. This means that externals who feel they are in less control were more inclined to engage with emotion-focused coping. A similar trend was observed between locus of control and 2 subcategories of emotion-focused coping, which are venting and self-blame. Our findings suggest that an increase in externality corresponds with increased use of emotion-focused coping strategies. Our findings are consistent with those of Petrosky et al., who found that externals were positively associated with characteristics of emotion-focused coping among the population of university-level students. And we found a modest positive correlation between locus of control and avoidant coping. This means that externals who feel that they are in less control were more inclined to engage in avoidant coping. A similar trend was observed between locus of control and a subcategory of avoidant coping, which is denial. This suggests that an increase in externality corresponds with increased use of avoidant coping strategies. Our findings corroborate with those of Scott et al., who found a significant positive relationship between external locus of control and avoidant coping behaviors among college students exposed to hurricanes. When the data were stratified by gender, we found that non-men scored significantly higher than men in all 3 general coping categories. Our findings are similar to those of Rank et al., who found that female adolescents use more emotion-focused strategies than male adolescents. However, our findings in the relationship between gender and problem and avoidant coping do not corroborate. He found that adolescents with high masculinity used more problem-focused coping and observed no significant difference in avoidant coping strategies. We found that men internals scored significantly higher than men externals in acceptance, which is an emotion-focused strategy. Meanwhile, there was no significant difference between non-men internals and non-men externals. We also found that non-men internals scored significantly higher than non-men externals in problem-focused coping. Similar trends were observed in problem-focused subscales. Our findings show that internal men seem to use more emotion-focused strategies, while internal non-men seem to use more problem-focused strategies. A modified version of the brief COPE inventory was used in the study. The substance use and turning to religion subscales were omitted from the original measure to make the scale more age appropriate. Meanwhile, a hobby subscale was added. These modifications may have caused scoring inconsistencies since the modified scoring system has not been completely validated. Another limitation of this study was that it was conducted on predominantly Asian population, which may have skewed results in directions that align with certain cultural values. The rise of anti-Asian sentiment during COVID-19 may have also influenced the observed results. Future studies could provide a more thorough examination of the relationship between locus of control and coping strategies across different age groups and races in the context of uncontrollable situations. In the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, Our findings suggest that internals use more problem-focused strategies than externals. Meanwhile, externals use less problem-focused strategies and more emotion and avoidance strategies instead. However, the trends observed between internals and externals are more nuanced as they appear, as gender discrepancies were observed between locus of control and problem and emotion-focused coping. Our findings suggest that both gender and locus of control influence coping response in suburban adolescents in an uncontrollable situation. Both can serve as helpful tools in psychological interventions during the pandemic. Thank you. And I'll take any questions at this time.
Thank you, Isabel, for a very thorough and topical presentation. So I will be waiting for questions to come in the chat. I'll ask one in the meantime. So I'm curious if there was any finding in your data in particular that surprised you.
Yeah, I think the fact that there were correlations between external locus of control and avoiding coping surprised me, because I thought that there would be none, because avoiding coping, people turn to avoiding coping because you can do pleasurable activities such as like going to the movies, like not thinking about your issues. So my initial hypothesis was that there would be no significant difference in avoiding coping. Yeah, but I was surprised that external locus of control was correlated with avoiding coping.
Thank you. So Kevin is writing in with the question, great presentation. What kinds of statistical tools did you use for your research? And did you look at variance, etc., as well as correlation?
Yes, I used SPSS for my statistical analyses. So I looked at linear regression analysis, t-tests, correlations, also looking at frequency tables. Yes, so those are some of the tools that I use.
Any other questions about methodology or definitions or anything from attendees?
Someone asked me how I collected my data and whether you ensured it was randomly sampled. Yes, I collected my data based on sending it to the surveys to students in my high school, and they were offered extra credit to complete the survey. So it's not completely random sampled because they are volunteers, so there is some bias associated with that. But I think with all psych studies, it's a common issue or a challenge that we face is getting enough participants to have statistically significant data. This is actually the second time I ran the study. My first time I had 196 participants, and the second time I ran my study, I got slightly more significant results because I had slightly more participants. Yes.
We still have a few minutes if anyone wanted to jump in with a question. Thanks, Isabel, for catching that one. I didn't immediately see the special Q&A screen, and now I do. Well, if there are no more questions, I'm going to usher you off the stage and welcome our next presenter, Jasmine Huang. Thanks, Isabel. So Jasmine, feel free to share your screen. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Jasmine. With my mentor, we have developed a research paper about innovation. I chose innovation because it's a famous marketing strategy that helps you gain market advantage. When you think of innovation technology, what do you usually think of? For many, the example that springs to their mind is Apple's invention of the iPhone. This is often cited as a classic example of innovation because it made smartphones easier and more intuitive than any of the phones ever before it, impacting the world in a massive way. Therefore, the topic of this research paper will be innovation creates volatility, the disadvantage of innovation. Innovation is a common strategy that companies use to gain market advantage and become the market leader. For example, Apple's invention of the iPhone. The invention overtook BlackBerry, which was the leader of the smartphone industry. iPhones are now used by 1 billion people worldwide, and in US 2021, 46.9% of all smartphone users owns an Apple iPhone. Innovation is also a commonly recommended strategy by different business leaders. For example, Steve Jobs has a famous quote saying, "Innovation distinguishes between a leader and a follower." Harvard Business Review also has a quote saying, "An explicit innovation strategy helps you design a system to match your specific competitive needs." So, what is the definition of innovation? Across many previous academic papers, innovation is mostly defined as the introduction of a new or improved idea or product. Previous research has shown innovation is an effective strategy to use to dominate the market and become the market leader. For example, a previous academic paper wrote about innovative later entrants are more likely to outsell pioneers than non-innovative later movers. Another one wrote about innovation is a good differentiation strategy because it draws greater attention to itself and occupies a unique position in the consumer's minds. Previous research has already shown that novel objects draw more attention, and really new products can operate in their own mysterious special product category. Researchers have predominantly focused on how innovation impacts individual firms and impact market leaders. However, previous researchers did not examine how innovation impact the market as a whole. Therefore, the focus of this research paper will be to examine how innovation affects industries instead of individual firms and market leaders. New growth from innovation can come from consumers who have never used this product before or from competitors in the same industry. The rise of one product will cause the fall of another product, therefore creating changes in the market rankings. The more innovation occurs between firms, the more often companies will change position in market, leading to greater competition. The hypothesis of this research paper will be more innovative product markets will experience greater changes in market share than less innovative markets. Market share data were collected online for product markets in the highly innovative industry and the low innovative industry. Innovativeness of industries was determined by using a list from the group Insider that ranks how innovative specific industries are. The information technology industry was chosen because it has the highest rank of any industry on the list. The food and beverage industry was chosen as a low innovation comparison because it had the second lowest industry in innovation. The search engine and the browser product market was chosen for the information technology industry. The fast food and beer product market was chosen for the food and beverage industry. The market share data was set up in a spreadsheet for browser, search engine, fast food, and beer product markets. For all the product markets, the annual market share data covers the years 2010 to 2020. For each pair of consecutive years for which there was data, the number of changes in the top 5 companies for the market were recorded. This resulted in 10 data points for each product market. For example, in Figure 1, this example of fast food market, the top 5 companies were McDonald's, Subway, Burger King, Wendy's, and Starbucks. From 2011 to 2012, Burger King and Starbucks switched position, resulting in 2 changes during this year. There were greater changes in market share for browser and search engine markets than the fast food and beer markets. The numbers represent the average of all changes across different years for each product market. The average number of product market were translated into average of the industry. There were greater changes in information technology industry as a whole than the food and beverage industry. The P represent probability, and the probability for when this is just all a coincidence is 7 out of 1,000, which is really low. The result shows innovation is good for product performance, but also leads to market volatility. Innovative product markets have more changes in market share than non-innovative product markets. Innovation causes changes in market share, which corroborates with previous findings that innovation allows companies to improve their position in the market. Frequent innovation means the effect from one company could be short-lived. Volatility could lead to unstable positioning, which means companies will need continuous innovation in order to remain as the market leader. Limitation. Some limitation for this research was this research was not experimental. All the data were all secondary data, therefore it cannot show causality. For further research, it would be helpful if someone could do an experiment on this to test if it's causal or not, or figure out any alternative explanation for these findings. It will be worth examining the advantages and disadvantages of market volatility. For example, an advantage could be greater volatility result in more chances to become the market leader. A disadvantage could be a more volatile industry makes it harder to continuously dominate the market. It's also worth uncovering how an innovative company can dominate the market despite volatility. For example, Google remained as the market leader for the search engine market for many years. It'll be helpful if someone can look into how did Google do this and what different marketing strategies Google use. Lastly, it will be helpful if someone can look into whenever is it possible for an innovative market to avoid volatility. Thank you for listening. Any questions?
Thank you, Jasmine, for the presentation. It's looking at a aspect of the market and consumer society that we often don't pay attention to. So please, attendees, write into the chat or the Q&A, and I will read out your questions. In the meantime, I am curious, Jasmine, what drew you to this topic? What sparked your interest enough that you'd want to dive deeper?
Originally, I was interested in marketing and psychology. And then for marketing, I was mainly interested in positioning, which is like how do you develop a unique position in the consumer's minds? So because of modern technology, I thought of innovation because I got, like, for example, from iPhones and iPads, which we're using in daily life. So I thought of innovation, so I want to look more into it. And then as I was collecting data, I found a disadvantage of innovation, which I was like very interested in. Yeah.
Thank you. And I see I wasn't the only one interested in that question. Charlotte also asked what drew you to the topic. So thanks for your answer. Well, we'll hang around in silence for people to kind of churn up questions because we are moving through these presentations and we actually have until 1:40 or 1:50. I have another question while attendees are thinking. At the very end of your presentation, you were thinking about the disadvantages and the advantages of a volatile market. And the two examples you gave were from the perspective of companies. And I'm curious if you've thought about that question from the perspective of the consumer, what the advantages and disadvantages of volatile markets are.
from the perspective of consumers, I actually haven't thought about that, but I think like if there's more competition, which is like in more volatile companies, advantage for the consumer could be there's more product choices, but this a disadvantage would be like you probably wouldn't use a product for a long time if there's like continuously shifting product because there's more choices. So you wouldn't be as loyal to a product, which could be a disadvantage.
Thank you. Anyone else have a question for Jasmine? Well, 4 minutes, but we can move on. Okay, thank you so much, Jasmine. All right, so next up we have Mallory Cooper. Welcome to the stage, Mallory, if you'd share your screen. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Mallory Cooper, and today I'm going to be presenting on how I worked with Polygons to write and publish my first children's book called I'm Perfect. So if I were to divide up my process of writing and publishing my book into 4 different steps, I would label them as planning, drafting, publishing, and sharing. And in this presentation, I'm going to be going through all 4 of these steps and the role that Polygons played in each one. So first up, we have planning. So for the entirety of my life, basically, I've always loved to write. From a young age, I would keep little diaries and, just write about my life. But as I progressed into high school, I began to realize that writing was something that I really loved to do and just a way for me to really express myself creatively that I felt like other outlets did not offer me. So coupled with that, I had some activities that kind of led to the birth of my idea to write my own children's book, and they're depicted on the screen. So on the left, you can see I have some pictures from club events. So that is my club called Warmkins for Healing Hugs. And basically we fundraise to give these specially heated stuffed animals called Warmkins to people in need. On the far left, you can see that is a picture from my freshman year at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. And the reason why I chose to give my first kind of distribution of Warmkins to Children's Hospital Los Angeles was because I had spinal fusion surgery to correct scoliosis when I was in 7th grade. So I've always wanted to give back to the supportive community that supported me through that journey. And so that desire to give back to CHLA is really what played a big role into writing my children's book. And I will discuss later how those lessons of resilience and self-acceptance I learned post-surgery kind of played a role in the writing of my book. And on the right, you can see that is a picture of me leading a virtual cooking class I called Cooks and Books. I was going to be a summer camp counselor that summer, but because of COVID, I was unable to do so. So I ended up leading a virtual cooking class called Cooks and Books on Zoom through my school district. And I would read the kids, elementary schoolers, a children's book and then lead them through an activity like a recipe that I would make up. And really what that showed me was the way that the kids would engage with children's literature was something I did not expect. Obviously, I remember being read children's book when I was younger, but just the excitement that they showed, even through a screen, was just amazing. And I realized, I want to give back to CHLA, and I love to write, and I love to interact with kids and connect with them. So I kind of realized that writing a children's book would be the perfect way to kind of combine all 3 of these interests. And yeah. So next up, we have drafting, and this is where Polygons really comes in. So I was looking for, the motivation and inspiration to start writing, because I truly feel like the hardest part of starting any writing project is sitting in front of whether it's a blank piece of paper or a blank screen and just having the motivation to know where to start. And so I found Polly Gens and I connected with my mentor, and he was super helpful in just getting my brain flowing and getting the ideas kind of started, because I knew what I wanted the book to have as an impact, but I wasn't really sure quite yet what I wanted the actual story to be and what I wanted the characters to truly be like. And so the first exercise that my mentor guided me through, he asked me to make little character profiles. And I truly feel like this was a very good exercise. And now whenever I write any written thing, whether it be a short story, a poem, anything like that, I make a character profile and I just go through every single aspect of their character, because truly it's, once you know what the character is like and what their motives are and what their interests are, they can fit more naturally into the world that you're trying to build. And I felt like this was definitely the case with my book. So you can see up on the screen, I have my two main characters. There were other characters. I just chose to include these two because they were the core characters in the story. So we have Harper and we have Zoe. So I kind of broke it down into like age, interests, overall character traits. And then I also put little pieces of dialogue because my mentor asked me, are there any pieces of dialogue that are starting to come to mind? And that was good because it was kind of helping with fleshing out the characters and just fleshing out the story overall. So from there, my mentor asked me to kind of make a brief kind of plot outline with the rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution, and of course, exposition at the beginning as well. And this was just a very, very brief plot outline where I would just bullet point things. And this was just a step along the journey of writing the book because, again, with the help of Polly Gens, I was able to take baby steps and eventually create an entire book. So next up, then I was eventually able to write a full manuscript, and my mentor was super helpful in getting my manuscript to a final version. When I'd written in the past, like diary entries or essays or short stories, there was never really a concrete division between sections. Yes, there were paragraph breaks or just certain pauses here and there, but the interactive nature of children's books with flipping the pages and having specific illustrations that go with each page, it just requires a specific like designation between each page. And because of that, my mentor was super helpful because I would divide up the pages and then he would make suggestions like, what if we move this sentence here? And even though they were very small changes, they change the overall flow and meaning of the book in a very different way. And so I worked through the pages, and something that my mentor was also super helpful with was the ending. I think I drafted probably like 3 different versions of the ending. And even though, again, I was tweaking it very slightly each time, my mentor was super helpful in kind of giving me feedback on that. And the feedback is just overall what I feel like was most helpful about my experience with Polly Gens and writing my book, because feedback for me is what makes me a better writer and what makes my piece the best it can possibly be. So once I was done with my manuscript, I got into the publishing phase. So I eventually sent my manuscript to Alligator Book Bites Publishing, and they read it and they liked it. And so working with a publisher, editor, and illustrator, eventually my book kind of became its final form. It went from a Google Doc to a book that people can now purchase. So now on to sharing. And this is probably my favorite step. And this is, again, going back to the initial ideas I shared at the beginning about my interests and also my goals for this book. And Polly Gens was super helpful in kind of guiding me along the writing process so that I could ultimately reap the benefits that I set out to achieve. So with my book, I decided to sell it on my website, malloryclairebooks.com. So I designed the website and I've been selling it through there. And I have boxes of books where I just take them and send them to anyone who orders them. And I've currently sold over 100 copies. And it's just really great getting to get my book out into the world. And this is probably my favorite part of this entire experience. So on the very left and the very right, those are pictures from my readings at my old elementary school and then another elementary school in my district. I was just so excited to share my book with the communities who supported me. So obviously my elementary school classrooms with the teachers who kind of sparked that love for writing and reading that I still have today. And it was, again, just amazing to see how great the kids connected with it, because while it's one thing to read a children's book through a screen, it's another thing to read it in person and just to see the excitement that they have when hearing my story. And again, I really emphasized self-acceptance and resilience, which I learned post-surgery. And it was great to have the kids raise their hands and tell me their own experiences with that in their own way of telling me. And in the middle, those are my cousins reading my book. I just was so happy that they were interested in my book, and not just because, they know the author, but because they were just reading it and they just loved the story. And I am seriously so thankful to Polly Gens for guiding me during each step of this journey, because without them, I would not be able to have this experience of sharing my story with the people around me and having an impact on my greater community. So thank you all so much, and I will wait for questions.
Thank you, Mallory, for taking us through that, what I imagine is a very rewarding process with such thoughtfulness. So we have our first question. This one comes from Charlotte. So thank you, Mallory. So interested to learn more about your writing and your process. Lots of questions. Start with one. You mentioned some difficulties with the ending. Can you tell us more about what was tough about writing the ending? Writing the ending, what you ended up deciding, and no need to give us spoilers, and why you decided what you ended up writing.
Yeah, so just a brief overview of the plot. You can kind of see on the cover, that's Harper with her vase, and she's putting it back together. So brief synopsis, she's a very artistic person, and she's really wants to impress everyone around her with her art, but she ends up breaking her vase before a very important showcase, and everyone around her is kind of telling her, you can't do anything about it. But she decides to try to put her vase back together with the help of her older sister, Zoe. And so the end of the book was at times a bit challenging for me to figure out, because I wanted there to be a resolution that applied the lesson that Harper learned to more people. So I ultimately decided to, I always knew I wanted Harper at the end to learn that it's not about how she can impress people with her art and kind of show off to people. It's about how she can kind of make a greater impact and be a kind and compassionate person. And so I always knew I wanted her to kind of decide to put her vase in the nurse's office instead of in like a trophy case. But in terms of why it was challenging for me, it was because there were just things with the language. I felt like I wanted to end it on a sentence that felt very final. Usually when I would read children's books, like with Cooks and Books, the sentence would feel very like final, like close the book, the end of the story. And so what I ultimately decided to go with, I focused a lot on the imagery, and that's what my mentor encouraged me to do. He said, well, envision what this nurse's office looks like. And who do you think will be most impacted by Harper's vase? And that was something that really helped me craft the ending to my vision, really.
Thank you, Mallory. The next question comes from Billy. Why do you think children's books are so impactful to many?
I think it's really just because for many people, it's their first experience with reading. And I think also something that I loved about children's books especially is you can convey very complex themes in a way that can be understood by younger audiences and of course older audiences as well. Because I incorporated my own experiences into it. I made the character Zoe, Harper's older sister, kind of based on myself. And so I was able to talk about my surgery in a way that made sense for younger audiences and in a way that they could also apply it to themselves. Because I feel like when children read or are read these children's books, they kind of see themselves in the characters. And that's something that I feel like is extremely special and can stick with them for the rest of their lives. Because I still have my favorite children's books that I think about from time to time and think those lessons I carry with me for my whole life. So
Thank you. Isabel, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? Or do you want?
Sure. Yeah, I was wondering what it was like to work with your illustrator and watch your book come to life. Did you know what you wanted your characters to look like, or did you even base their looks on like you said, you based the character Zoe on yourself? Does Zoe look like you?
So actually, when I was first kind of writing this book, so it was over the last summer, I just watched the movie Luca. It's a Pixar movie, and I love the animation style. So I kind of knew, at least for the art style, that was kind of what I wanted. And my mentor also encouraged me, even though we both decided I was not going to be illustrating the book, because even though I can draw, I don't think it would be exactly the way I wanted it to look. So, but my mentor still encouraged me to do some character sketches. So I did them. And then when I got in touch with my illustrator, I gave her some illustration notes. So I gave her like features of the character that I wanted to incorporate. When she sent back the initial character sketches, they matched my sketches, even though she had never seen them before. So I feel like my illustrator, her name's Audrey, she just understood my vision very well. And I'm just so happy with how the illustration worked out. But in terms of like how it was working with her, she would send me a few pages because I would give her notes for every page of what I thought the illustration should look like. And sometimes she would like slightly tweak it, but she would send them to me. And then if I wanted color changes, like for example, at first Zoe was wearing a yellow dress and I wanted to do purple because I felt like that represented her character more. I'd say yes, I did kind of make Zoe look like myself because I wanted to kind of base it on myself, because I feel like when you write, it's best to write about your own experiences and what you know, because that way it feels very authentic and very genuine and people can really connect with it. But it was definitely fun going to my old elementary school classes and reading the books to the kids and having them ask, oh, is that supposed to be you? And then I would say, yeah, kind of.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Charlotte has a follow-up. What was most surprising to you about the process of writing? Was anything more difficult than you anticipated or easier?
I would say the hardest part was probably dividing the pages up, as I was saying, because I feel like people think it's easy to write a children's book. I thought that children's books were a little simple at times, like depending on the book at first before I started writing. But then I realized to get my points across, I also have to make it in a way that's understandable. So the way that I write is not necessarily the way that kids understand. So like I had to change the vocabulary a little bit and add some interactive moments, because I always loved when my teachers or my parents would read books and kind of do like sound effects or different voices. And so that was surprising to me to kind of, for the first time, instead of trying to make my writing sound more complex, I had to, in some ways, make it sound a little less complex, just so that it was understandable by the children. But yeah.
Thank you, Mallory. I suppose I will ask one final question before we end today's presentation. I'm curious whether this has sparked an interest in you in writing more children's books, or what sort of direction you think you'll take this, the skills that you've gained in this research project or creative project.
Yeah, I mean, definitely my project was a little bit less traditional, but I feel like I really was just reaffirmed in my love for writing through this experience, and in the importance I feel feedback has on my writing. I could definitely see myself continuing to write children's books, but I also, just because I love this process so much, I could also see myself writing different genres of books. I love to read and I love fiction books. So I could see myself going in that direction as well. I want to keep my options open because all I know is I love to write and I love to make stories that impact people. So, yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to stop your screen share and just say a little, a huge thank you for all the presentations and all the hard work that you put into your projects. And also a big thank you to attendees for showing up and supporting the students in their work. At Paul against, we're very proud of all their accomplishments, and we're glad to be here today to cheer you on. So yeah, also an encouragement to keep attending the symposium sessions and cheering on your fellow students. And that's it. Thanks so much, and have a great rest of the day.